Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. Today we're visiting with Angela Thoburn. Have I pronounced that correctly?
That's correct.
Angela, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
You're looking good.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Start this side of heaven and don't leave anything out. Well, leave some things out.
Well, let's see. I'm the eldest daughter of an eldest daughter, two other eldest daughters that will mean something. I grew up in the Midwest in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was a teacher, and then I was a principal, and then I abandoned education. I didn't like what I saw was going on.
What didn't you like about it?
Oh, I saw us becoming more and more rigid. When I taught, it was in the 70s when they had open space schools and team teaching and individualized education, which I still believe in. And I saw us going more to rote, learning facts, getting away from critical thinking, some of the things that I believe very strongly in. I saw discipline techniques I didn't agree with. And so at that point, I happened to remarry. And my charming husband said, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life?"
Well, that was nice of him.
Wasn't that nice of him?
He must be a great guy.
He's a great guy. My mother used to call him a keeper. And I spent a couple years just searching that out, saying, well, you know, what do I really want to do? Ended up opening a boutique training firm. Did a lot of work for 25 years in corporations, large corporations and hospitals until I retired. And now we're here in St. George. We've been here about 4 years.
What brought you here?
Well, we started coming up here in 2002. I, at that point, had been diagnosed with breast cancer, a very virulent diagnosis, and was really fighting for my life. We were living in Vegas at the time, and I just knew Vegas wasn't a good place to recover.
Las Vegas. I thought what happened in Vegas stayed in Vegas. How did you escape?
Well, fortunately, Starbucks came here, and my husband was willing to move. So we actually started coming up here in 2002. I fell in love with the community. I like smaller communities. He's kind of a big city boy, so it took a Starbucks before he would come. So we moved up here 4 years ago. We've been coming for 13 years. I like the safety, I like the security. The big decision was that he also contracted cancer. And when we weren't sure he was going to survive, he turned to me one day and said, "Where would you like to live?" And I said, "I won't be an old lady in Las Vegas alone. Thank you very kindly." And that's when we decided to come up here.
How long did you live in Las Vegas?
Too long. 99 till, I think about 13 years.
What were you doing there?
Well, at that time, I had my company, so I was traveling a lot. And because I was traveling, I really didn't get the full impact of just what a challenging city that is. I'll use a nice word. And so I was going constantly to New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. I would come home and then I would travel again. When I retired was when I really got to see that this was not a community I wanted to stay in.
Well, Las Vegas hasn't always been that way.
I understand that. It just became, well, for one thing, it was so transient that it was troublesome. We lived in a neighborhood where houses turned over almost every year. And it did not look like a place that I could feel comfortable or safe, especially if I were alone. So here we are.
Well, I'm glad you came here so we could interview you.
I'm glad we're here too.
What was the greatest challenge in your life?
You know, I wouldn't say there's a greatest one. There's probably been 3 or 4. The first was getting my education. I was the first woman in my family to go to college.
Where did you go to school?
I went to the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And, you know, it's in the 50s. I graduated in 58. So not many women were going. I think only 4 girls in my entire Catholic high school went to college of my graduating class. So that was a challenge.
You graduated from college in 58?
No, I graduated in 62. 58 from high school. And at that time, you know, it was, if you did want to go to college, which was never suggested to me, it would be to be a teacher or a nurse. And so I became a teacher. Today, I think I would have made a different decision.
You'd have been a nurse?
I would have been, I think I would have been an interior decorator. I think I would have gone into something more really creative. I've discovered that in my old age, that I really enjoy that. The second challenge was a divorce. You know, being raised the way I was, I never intended to be divorced.
You were Catholic?
I was Catholic, come from a Sicilian family, strong commitments to family. So that was very, very challenging, very difficult for me. The third one, I'd say...
Did you have children?
No, I didn't have children, which is a mixed blessing. I know people thought it was great, but in essence, I think children give you something to focus on besides yourself.
Right.
Then I think the next issue was taking care of aging parents, you know, which is can be a challenge, and it was a challenge in my case. And then I think the next big challenge was, of course, my cancer and my husband's cancer, which I found even more difficult than my own. You know, watching somebody I love struggle to stay alive.
How did you, are you cancer-free now? Or
We're both cancer-free.
How did you work that out?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question because I had, as I said, I had a particularly aggressive form of cancer, and when I made it through my first chemo treatments, my oncologist thought I would need another one, and I didn't. And she was quite surprised, and she asked me that question, how do you explain this? And I said, three things. I had enormous support. I can't tell you the degree of support I had from friends across the country. And the second thing was that I really do believe that you have a responsibility for your own life and the quality of your own life, and I took responsibility. What could I do that would give me a chance? And the third is I really had an intention to be an outrageous old woman. And she laughed too. With my husband, he had non-Hodgkin's, which you know might be a particularly difficult form of cancer, especially when he had it. But we went to MD Anderson in a research hospital in Houston, and I credit them with saving his life. He too has some of the same values that I do. He's a fighter. So we're here.
How did you meet your husband?
Okay, in a bar in Kansas City.
In a bar in Kansas.
I was having a drink with a friend. I was ready to go home. He came in. He asked a question of a friend who couldn't answer it. I kind of tend to be open and friendly with lots of people. I answered it. We started talking, and the rest is history. He called me one night, and we started talking and conducted a long-term telephone conversation, and soon discovered that maybe we ought to get together. So 2.5 years later, I moved to Cleveland, and we were married.
So he wasn't from the same area?
Oh, no, he was from Cleveland, and the only time he was ever in Kansas City, the one time he visited, that's all. So
you were a teacher.
I was at that point, I was a principal. When I was a teacher, I taught elementary school. I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Nice age of children, really great age. I loved it.
And where was that?
That was all over. Wisconsin, California, Iowa City.
Where in California?
Davis. My ex-husband was in, I was one of that generation who put hubby through school. He was getting his PhD in Davis. And then I became a principal, and I didn't enjoy that as much.
Why not?
Well, I didn't enjoy the politics of it. I didn't enjoy the...
There's politics in education?
Oh, yes. I didn't enjoy the trying to keep all parties happy. You know, I really believe strongly that an elementary principal is the ombudsman for her or his school. First and foremost, that's what they're there for. And sometimes that ran counter to what the district wanted. So the more I looked at it, I thought, I don't have the temperament nor the values for playing those kinds of games. Maybe it's time to leave.
How long were you a principal?
5 years of 3 very challenging schools, which was the other thing. I temperamentally would take problems home, and I had a hard time, and I think I really appreciate those who can do it, having the kinds of boundaries that would let me see some of what I was seeing and not be emotionally distraught by what I saw.
You say there are problem schools?
They were schools with high degrees of alcoholism,
in the
broken
students?
families. No, in the parents.
Okay.
Broken families, and the children feel the results of that. Massive layoffs in one of the schools that just exacerbated problems. Fortunately, not yet drugs, but the children were well, we would call them at-risk children, and had children taken away by foster services and things, social services. And I would go home quite distraught. And I didn't want to become the kind of person that wouldn't be distraught. Does that make sense?
Makes absolute sense.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you teach?
I taught for 16 years, and I enjoyed it. I loved it. I found the children that I taught to be curious. It was a stage where you could still go to parents and say, we really need your help here, and not be told, well, that was our business and they didn't want to be bothered. And there was a great deal of experimentation in the schools in terms of trying new curriculum programs, teaching critical thinking, exploring different value systems and things that are harder to do today in a lot of our schools.
Well, as I recall, when I was little and going to school, they taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's changed today.
It's gotten very complex. It's a very complex world. Yeah.
What about Common Core?
Well, my concern, let me back up. I have a particular value for and concern for critical thinking. And what I see too often is that what's happening is stress on the accumulation of facts and passing tests and things. And then we say our kids aren't thinking. Well, they don't think just think critically naturally. It takes a willingness to also deal with the results of their critical thinking, which sometimes they challenge, sometimes they raise questions, sometimes they ask, why are we doing this? And we have to be, as adults, comfortable enough with those kinds of questions to allow that and be willing to live with ambiguity and sometimes not knowing. So I have a concern for it, and most of my friends that are still in education are quite concerned too.
These are educators
Yes.
that are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
We have a daughter that's a teacher, elementary school teacher. I think she teaches the 4th grade. But she's quite concerned about it.
Mm-hmm.
Critical thinking. Should students or people be given both sides of a situation or allowed to look at both?
I would actually say more than both sides.
All 5 sides?
Whatever. I think we need to start seeing the world in shades of gray rather than black or white. And sometimes admit we don't even know what the sides are yet. That's a part of the exploration. I think we need to learn to think together rather than in polar opposites. The polarization, the right, wrong, good, bad, was always something that I worked with students to see that perhaps there was something else. What if there was still another possibility? That's where I think critical thinking comes in. Yeah, I have a real concern about that.
New information. We should look at new information and evaluate it, I guess.
And know what our criteria are for evaluating it. It's not just the evaluation, but where's the criteria coming from? Is there criteria that we're not considering? Some of those issues, yeah. My husband and I are of 2 different political persuasions, and we manage. We do talk about politics. I know people say don't talk about it, but we do. And I think we do.
And both of you are still alive.
And we're both still alive, and we like each other. But I think it is because we are both willing to hear out the other person and concede where we haven't thought about something a particular way. We don't always vote the same way, but it doesn't matter. I don't really care, nor does he, about how we vote as much as that we vote and that we know why we're voting the way we do. But that doesn't seem to be a common conversation from what I see.
Well, I think people that don't give the other person's views a chance are insecure in their own belief or whatever. Maybe they're not, but that's always been my guesstimation about what the situation is.
It takes work. It takes work to think. It takes work to think critically, and it isn't simple and it isn't easy, but when it works, It's wonderful. You know, when I can say to him, I wasn't thinking of that, he always says thank you. When he sees something that I've posed in a way that he wouldn't before, I always say thank you, because it is a gift to be able to listen to each other that way.
Well, if we just dismiss the other person's opinion out of hand, we've missed something.
Absolutely.
Potentially missed a lot.
Absolutely. You know, I think I told you this story, and since you're gathering...
You mentioned it.
Yeah, I'd like to...
Go ahead.
You give an example. When I first arrived here, I went to Starbucks, and I was looking for a place to sit down, and it was very busy. And a gentleman was getting up from his seat, so I quickly moved over and asked if I could have the table. He said yes. And he had his Kindle with him, and I had just bought mine. So I just simply said, I think my husband says I'm kind of a community welcome wagon myself, but I just asked him how he liked it.
Maybe Starbucks should start paying you.
Maybe they should. And I asked him how he liked it, and he sat back down to talk about it, and 3 hours later, after we had talked about everything, like how do you find your way in a new city, because he does that very well apparently, and we talked religion, and we talked where we had come from in education. We got to politics and discovered that much as we had been pretty much aligned on all those other things, when it came to politics, we definitely were not. And I just kind of held my breath as he made some statements that I thought were fairly outrageous, but I just held my breath and said, would you hear another point of view, because I don't necessarily agree with that. And he said yes. So I posed another point of view, and he hung in there with me, because I could tell it was really quite contrary to the way he saw things. But as he left, he turned back and he said to me, we have different feelings about the president at that time. And he thought the president hated the country, and I said I didn't see it that way. He came back, he said, you know, you didn't change my vote. I said, I know, I wasn't trying. He said, but I will consider that he doesn't hate the country. I said, well, that's not bad for 3 hours, right? He turned around and he came back one more time, and he looked at me and he said, do you think we wouldn't be so polarized if more people could talk the way you and I just talked? I have to tell you, I felt very good about that. And my response was, oh dear God, I hope so. So that's what keeps me going and having those conversations.
Do you have children?
No, we don't. We don't. We have a lot of I have a lot of younger women that I have mentored, and I consider some of them almost like daughters.
What does your husband do, or what did he do?
He was an engineer, and it was quite a challenge for me, because we think very differently. You know, he's very linear, and I'm very all over the map. And he still has a business. He sells and helps produce a product that covers asbestos and lead-based paint rather than pulling it down.
So you can go into an old house and cover it up instead of tearing it out.
Absolutely.
That must be a lot less expensive.
Much less expensive, and he takes great satisfaction because it's done with the internet. He's able to still do it. You know, he hasn't had to retire, thank heavens. Because I think if we were both home all the time, we'd see how well we communicate. I think we do pretty well because he stays busy.
And how many years have you been married again?
We've been married 32 years. 32 years. I consider that one of the victories of my life.
What was his opinion of our current president? Or shouldn't I ask?
No, it's all right. He doesn't like him. He doesn't like him. My husband is, his background, well, let me back up. I think if we really want to understand each other, we really have to understand some of the things that you asked me about at the beginning, our backgrounds. Our backgrounds are very, very different, his and mine.
What's his background?
I come from a family where my parents were married for 60 years. His mother was married 7 times. So he moved in and out of a lot of different homes. I had much more stability than he did. He's very, very bright in a nonverbal way. So he's good with numbers. My strength is verbal. He didn't finish college. He got bored, and I have advanced degrees. We have a lot of differences. I love to read, he doesn't. He likes country western music, I like opera. So we have a lot of differences.
30, how many years this
30.
miracle went on?
32 years.
32 years.
And we're stronger now than ever.
Well, that's good. What are some other stories you can tell us?
Oh, probably a couple that I was thinking about that coming here. The story of how I got to college. I was going to a Catholic high school at the time. As I say, the nuns were basically get married or become a nun. It was, pretty much the expectations. And out of, heaven knows whether you call it God or fate or serendipity, a young woman came to our high school to give IQ tests. And that was very new. She was doing it for a master's degree. And I was one of the girls that was chosen to take the test. I had no thought of going to college. Never crossed my mind. And she took the IQ test and she came back and asked me what college I was going to. And I said I wasn't. And she became quite upset and said, you're too smart. You need to go to school. This was a young woman that I think today we would call a feminist, probably. Again, we didn't have that word yet. And she spoke to the nuns to try to get me to go to school. She was willing to talk to my parents, which I was smart enough to say I don't think so. And out of that did create the picture for me that I could maybe do this. Had it not been for her, I don't know that I would have gone to school. I don't know her name, never did remember her name, but everything is different because of that young woman. Everything is different than that young woman, because of that young woman. And I thank her every day.
You mentioned the word feminist.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to figure out what that meant.
Well, it means a lot of things, like most labels do. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of what it could believe, from radical feminism to, I call myself a feminist, but I certainly never burned any of my underwear, and I didn't march. But I have always believed that women need to be treated equally with men, that they should have the same opportunities, that they should be paid what men are paid for the same job, that they should be valued and respected, that we should consider that women are smart.
Well, I thought we did all that. Am I out of touch with reality?
Some people do that. Some people do that. Not all people do that.
I got a letter asking if I was a feminist, and I thought...
Oh, I think there are men who are feminists.
I always thought that women were superior. And I hearkened back to an old TV show. It was called The Name of the Game.
Oh, I remember that.
And Tony Franciosa.
Yes, I remember that.
And Susan St. James.
Yes.
And she laid into him one day, and he said, "Don't you believe in the equality of the sexes?" And he looked at her and he said, "Yeah, and I'm working to get it back."
Well, my husband is a feminist. I have great support. He's always encouraged me to do what I want to do. He believes. I've had people tell me that they rarely meet a man who talks about his wife with the degree of respect that my husband talks about me.
They haven't met me.
Well, great. And there are, and my brother's that way. I've been very fortunate to meet men who believe that. But I've also met men that are nasty, that ridicule women, that demean women, that hurt women. And
I don't understand what they think that's going to accomplish.
I don't either. I am, one of the things I am involved in is I'm the chairman of the board of trustees for the Aaron Kimball Foundation. Do you know that organization?
I've heard of it. Tell me about it.
It provides transition housing for women who have left domestic violence. And so I know some of the other stories. And there's still too much of it, way too much of it.
It's terrible.
It is terrible. I thought I knew a lot about it until I got involved, and I'm just appalled at some of the statistics and the consequences to women and to their children. They're very, very great. I'm glad to see there are now campaigns of men speaking out against it, which I think has to happen if it's going to change.
Everyone should speak out against it.
I agree with that.
There's absolutely no justification.
I agree with that. Absolutely. We're talking to the choir, as they say, on this one.
It's unbelievable how mean people are to other people.
You know, I had a friend one time who watched me when I was in kind of the depths of despair over some of that. And he looked at me and he said, Angie, don't try to make sense out of nonsense. And I have held that. You know, it's held me in
Don't try to make
sense out of
nonsense.
nonsense. You can't understand this. It's not to be understood. Certainly not from the values that we have. You know, if we could, I don't want to understand it, I don't think.
I've never understood that. Of course, I had a mother and a father who were great people and taught me that you respect other people, whether they're men, women, children, whatever. And so I don't understand people. I mean, I've been rude to people, and I've tried to repent in my old age, but I've never physically or tried to abuse people or ridicule them or something. Disagree with them maybe in bad situations.
There's a wonderful book that was written a number of years ago called I think it's called The Death of Civility. I have to go back and take a look at it. And I remember reading it and thinking then, and that was like maybe 20 years ago, I think it's gotten worse to where calling names is okay, trash talking is okay.
Well, politics is gotten that way.
Yeah, it's very nasty. It's part of it, you know, going back to one of your original questions, it's part of why we moved here.
Is it better here?
Oh, it's a much more civil community here.
We've got a little over a minute left. What's your advice to people? In 1 minute.
Life is short. It's very short. I'm coming on my 75th birthday, and I'm shocked every time I say that. It's short, and I think we should live each day with joy and truly treat other people the way we want to be treated. I am constantly, what I get shocked at is people who demand respect and don't give it. People who want to be treated with a certain degree of dignity and yet don't allow others the same. So that would be it. I'm not a terribly religious person, but I do think treat others the way you would like to be treated.
Are you a Catholic? Are you still Catholic?
No, I'm not. I'm not. And so I think that's a really good, if we did that one, I think a lot of things would work their way out.
Well, Angie, do you go by Angie? Or
Yes, I do.
Angie, it's been fantastic talking with you.
Oh, thank you.
This is Lane Ronnow from the campus of Dixie State University. We've been talking to Angie Thoburn.
Thoburn?
Thoburn. I blew that.
That's all right.
Thanks for being with us on A Story to Tell.